All right, Mist. Um, I'm not going to go over everything in a whole bunch of detail. I'm just going to summarize, just because I know that you've already looked at this a couple times and we talked about it. So let me just try my best here to put you in the same situation we were in the other day, so you know what's going on. Um, so if you look at my file directory here, um, personally, I have a folder called MistCop specifically for this tutorial. You have a separate folder, and then you ran git clone to copy my public succulent repository off of GitHub. And when you did that, you got a couple things. You got the contract, the site, and SassyGen, which is what we're talking about, as well as these two files here that are not really important at all. Um, and we are currently inside of SassyGen. I'm going to close the File Explorer because I got it here on the left. Um, don't worry about the contract and the site for right now. This file is called generate ipynb, which is just a Jupyter Notebook file. Each of these code blocks here can be ran individually, or you can run them all with this run all at the top. Um, and I guess let's just talk about each of these real quick. So first one is imports. You got to have these so that you can actually run some of these commands, like with Pillow, to compile your images and the JSON at the bottom there. This first section here is the beginning of the important stuff. Um, you can rename all of these traits here. So, okay, apologies. This first line here is the name of your traits. These are what's going to show up on OpenSea in the description or the properties. Below that is the weights. For each name, you need a weight. These need to correspond. You know, if you have like 5 things up here, you got to have 5 things down here. You can't have more or less. And all of these need to add up to 100. Up to 100 because they are percentages, essentially. Um, if you would like to refactor these, so say you don't have a body in the image you're creating or something, you want to change this to I don't know, hats or something. If you highlight it and press F, it doesn't do anything because that's not how that works. My bad. But you can type in body up here in the search box, and it'll pull up. It's got 19 results. But if you press this first button here that says match case, now it's body with a capital or with a lowercase b, and we want to, if you click this drop down, we want to replace all of the bodies with the lowercase b with the word hat with the lowercase h. And you can scroll through, it'll highlight it over here on the left, or wherever it pops up, and you can scroll through them with these arrows. So we're going to start up at the top at number 1 out of 12. You can replace it by pressing this first button and see how every time you press this, it'll just refactor it. If you want to do them all at once, you can press the right button and it'll replace all. Personally, I don't recommend that on this file specifically, but in the future, it's kind of nice to have. So you just go through and replace all these where it says body with hat. I missed one. Go up to that one. Ta-da. Body. Body, body. Okay, I'm going to do a replace all now. So that's that. That's refactoring for you. So these are the names. This first line here, this is the name. This is the weight. And then if you scroll down, we've got all of the files. So this first one here is a name specifically from the name up top. And they should correspond directly. So the best way to do this is when you're making some hat files or just the file names in general. We're going to call this example underscore files equals this thing. What I do is I just take this whole line, whatever I called them up here, and I copy it and I paste it right there. And then I just go through and I click enter, 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 enter. And then on the bottom one, I add a comma and I press space. And the reason for that is because all of these have a comma and a space next to them. And then I'm going to highlight all of these. And if you press, we'll talk about this later with the hashes as well, but if you press Alt-Shift-I, it will select every row that you have highlighted and put the cursor at the end of the row. Again, we'll talk about that in a sec, but it's helpful here as well. So you can backspace these, and then you add a colon and a comma, deselect them all, and then this is where you're going to put the file names. So if you look in your trait layers folder, we have, I'm just going to match these up to the plants just because that's what's actually here. So for prickly pear, we have a file called prickly. And this is why, if you've worked with other people before, this is why they like them as shorter names, just because it's easier to type this stuff in here rather than having like prickly underscore cactus underscore second edition or some shit like that. Right. So you just go through here and you pick out the corresponding file names over here on the left. Don't worry about the .png because that gets covered later on in the file. So I'm going to erase this just so it doesn't hang around a bit. These are all file names right here. You've got your total. I'm sorry. This next block is going to pick out all of your choices and put them in its own object that has each of these attributes. So each object that gets created, it's going to be added to this new image array right here. And it will have body, and then it's going to have a corresponding choice from, well, we just changed this one, so this is a bad example. It'll have the pot and its corresponding choice from the pot names and the pot weights, to give it a preference there. It'll loop through, pick out all of the attributes that are going to make up all of your images. You can change the number of images up top here. I've got 6,000, but this could be 10,000 or 10 or whatever. Just make sure that you have enough possibilities for it. And you can calculate your possibilities by multiplying like your number of traits for each layer. So say my hat layer has 5 options, my body layer has 4, my shoe layer has 7 or something. This will tell you how many possibilities you can have. So just follow that routine. This will crash if you don't have enough possibilities and you're trying to generate too many. But I think you said you already had a couple, like 100 layers or something, so you really shouldn't have an issue with this. It grows pretty fast. So it'll generate. This one will generate all of your choices, store them in this big array up here called all images. This next section checks that all of your images are unique, and it'll print true or false right underneath in this little block down here. This block will add a token ID to each of them. So it'll just loop through the whole all images array that we just made and add a token ID. This next one is intentionally commented out, but it would print all of your images in that. They're not actual pictures, but all of your image objects inside of that all images array that we just made. This is going to be a disaster, so don't actually uncomment this unless you really want to see what your choices are, but you'll see them when you look at the metadata anyway. This one will count out how many options or how many choices were picked for each one. Very helpful in that it'll give you an idea of whether or not you want to like rerun this whole thing before it actually goes through the process of printing out all of the PNGs or JPEGs or whatever you're making. So if this will print out right underneath the block, And if you're just scanning it and you don't like how it looks, then you can just click interrupt and run all, and it'll just restart the whole process. So this is really good for troubleshooting if you want a super rare trait or something that keeps popping up, 10 or 12 times, and you only want it like 4 times. Then this will tell you if it just keeps popping out 10 or 12, then you know you have to adjust the weights up at the top of this program. And finally, this prints out a giant metadata file that is called alltraits.json, and you should have it over here in the left under the metadata folder. And it'll print out something like this. This is this specific format here of having your choices inside of curly braces. This is called JSON. It's just nothing fancy. It's just a formatting standard. So don't worry about that. But if you notice, there's no ipfs hashes in here, and that's because we haven't uploaded our images to ipfs. So again, that's the whole purpose of this video. We'll get to that in a second. And finally, this is going to compose all of your images. So it'll read all of those choices, and it will open up the file corresponding with that choice. So when we had that variable up top called like hat files and body files and stuff, this is where it's going to find the name of your background. In this case, in the name of your background, the name of your trait, and its corresponding file name, and it will look it up inside of these folders right here. So if you're having trouble, I usually have trouble with this just because it's kind of picky. But if you're having trouble, it says file not found or something, make sure that these names right here along the left, these folder names, are actually correct. So that can be found over here in the trait layers. We've got backgrounds. We don't have hats because I don't actually have hats for my project. So if I were to run this, it's going to throw a file not found error for this line because it won't be able to find the hats folder. Yeah, and then, well, we covered that. Never mind. So it'll pick out all these images, right? Load them in as variables, M1, M2, all the way down. And then it's going to start composing them. It'll create composite 1, which is going to take your first 2 images, image 1 and image 2. And then it's going to make your second composite. It'll take the first composite and the next image in the list. So for this step, you need to make sure that your composites are usually one, or your composites should be one number lower than your images. So I've got 7 images and 6 composites. And you need to adjust this accordingly. So if we were to make a 7th image or an 8th image, we would call this image 8, and we would make a new composite called composite 7, and it's going to compose composite 6 with image 8, right? So this would be our final image. We need to convert it to RGB down here. So because I added a new line, this is no longer correct. This needs to be composite 7, not composite 6. And finally, it's just going to store it as it's going to save it as the token ID.png. So, if this was the first file, it would be 0.png or 1 or 2.png. And it will save it in this folder, which is probably called images 2, and you probably don't have that. Make sure you delete that too there. Okay, so this part will create individual metadata files. Would not recommend doing this. And I also never use this, so I'm not going to try and talk my way through it. For the sake of this video, I want to keep it short. But this last section here it'll open up 2 files, and it's going to pretty much combine them. It's the program itself is really easy. The part of getting the hashes is pretty complicated. So we'll just run through this program real quick. It's going to open up the alltraits.json that you made earlier. It's also going to open up a file called hashes.json. In mine, let me close these trait layers. In mine, my hashes.json is empty. because I'm about to show you how to add it. And all traits.json has the attributes, no image hash in here, right? So we are going to create those images. So I'm going to open up my file explorer real quick just to show you where we're standing. If I go into SassyGen, I have a folder called images, and it has a subfolder called 0 to 999. What you want to do is create all of these. Once you're done generating the images, you want to group them by about 1,000. That number isn't specific to anything other than it's nice and clean. So take like 0 through 999, and you're going to throw them in a folder. Take 1,000 through 1999, throw them in a folder. 2,000 through 299, you get the gist. So at the end of this, you should really just have a couple folders here. It shouldn't have any images hanging out at the bottom, unless you copy them. I just moved them all. So we've got a folder called images with a subfolder underneath it, right? So if you open up a new terminal, let me close this, go to terminal at the top and click new terminal. We're going to need 2 of these. So the first one, we are going to start our own ipfs node. On the command line, you can do that by typing ipfs daemon, like that, and it should start your port. So you've got a node running. This terminal is now taken. We can't do anything on it. So we got to open a new one. If you come over here to the plus button, it'll just open a new one for you. Now, we are in the wrong directory. If you're not familiar with command lines, let me tell you how to get through this. So we need to navigate down to that image folder that we had inside of our public succulent. So if you type ls, it'll list everything that's inside of this folder. So inside of mistcop, we have another folder called public succulent. So we can change directories by typing cd public-succulent, and this is case sensitive, so make sure you're doing that right. And now we need to go to images, so we can type ls to figure out what's in this folder, and images would be inside of SassyGen. So we're going to go cd sassy-gen, and we're going to ls again, figure out what's going on, and finally we're going to cd to images. I'm going to type clear just to clear this terminal. Don't freak out. To verify that we're in the right spot, I'm going to type ls, and we've got our folders 0 through 999, right? So inside of this folder, we have all of the images that we need hashes for, essentially. The purpose of this step here is not to actually upload them to ipfs, it's to get the hash. Because we're going to be uploading them on Pinata anyway, this part is not really important other than to collect the hashes. So to add this whole folder, we are going to type ipfs add -r and then the folder name, so space, and it's going to be 0-999. And when I press this, it's going to upload all of these pictures followed by the folder CID. So the folder is called 199, but I actually only have like 50 pictures in there, so this list is pretty short. But if you're doing it by the thousands, there will be 1,000 of these print statements right here. So this final line is the folder CID. We don't need that at all, at least not for this step. You might need it later, but not to my knowledge. So what we're going to do is we've got this file called hashes.json that's completely empty. We are going to copy and paste all of these hashes in here into hashes.json. So if you start at the end, right before the folder hash, because we don't need it, and work your way up to the top. Control C, come over here, Control V, and I'm going to shrink this terminal down. So this information here needs to be in JSON format, and the only part we actually care about is this hash and this number right here, the file name, not the PNG, just the number. So the way we can edit all of these lines at once is going to be by holding Alt-Shift and then, oh, I apologize. We got to select them all first. So if you press Control A, it'll select everything, and then Alt Shift I will put a cursor at the end. We want to go to the beginning of the line and get rid of that word added. So if you press Home, it'll move the cursor to the front of every line. And we can just press Delete to get rid of added and that extra space. And we are going to add some quotations here. All of these hashes are the exact same length, so we can just go to the end of the hashes right here and add a second quote. I'm going to space, and we're going to put a colon in here. And I'm going to move my cursor over, and we're going to delete this 0 through 999. And the slash. And finally, we're going to press end. And the reason you press end and not just tab over, space or arrow over, is because end will put the cursor at the end. If you arrow over and these numbers right here are a different length, like these are in the thousands or something, it's not going to be accurate. So let me reselect all this. So Control A, Control Shift I. Cursor's at the end. We're going to delete this .png and the period. Add a quote here. And again, because these numbers right here are not all equal length, I have to go to the beginning again and work my way over from the front, because we know that the front is all the same length. And to finally toss that in quotes right there. Now it's pretty much in JSON format, but it's not finalized until you throw it into curly braces. So you go to the very top of the file, open up a space or press an enter, open up some curly brackets, and go all the way down to the bottom and close the curly brackets. Now I forgot a step right here. You can tell that because there's all this red stuff and it looks ugly. So I'm going to Alt Shift I, and we're on the end of every line. It's including the curly braces down here, which we don't want, but it's not really a big deal with this small of a file. And we need to add commas to the end of these lines. So we're going to put a comma there, delete this last comma, and the one on the curly brace, and the one that it put up top here, and boom. So now we have all of our hashes in JSON format. If we go back over here to our generate IPBN, we can just combine these, and I'll show you how to do that in 1 second. But because you're going to be running this part of the script independently, just as a single cell block, you got to remember to run the import statements at the top. So go all the way to the top of the file, press the play button on the import statements, so now that's imported, and come down here and we can press play on this, and it prints out each one as it adds it, and it'll truncate because there's a shit ton of them. And we can verify that this worked by going over to finaltraits.json, which is what it calls the file right here. And we now have an image IPFS hash in our final traits. So when you're serving your metadata from your website or from a database or whatever, you want to be putting the finaltraits.json file in, not all traits, because final traits has your hash in it. And lastly, you want to verify these numbers here are actually correct. If we look at the generate file, the first one for token ID 0 ended with DHM4. So if we go to final traits, this image IPFS hash for token ID 0 ends with DHM4. So you know that it worked that way. One more time, because I know it's easy to forget, to select everything in here, you want to do Control A, and then to put your cursor at the end, you can do Alt Shift I, and to move your cursor to a standardized location at the beginning of the line, you can press the Home button. So that should be everything. If you have more questions, let me know.